The Michael Berry Show.
I received an email from a listener that said, Michael, I believe you spoke about the case of an engineer in Oregon who was fined by the Oregon Professional Engineering Regulatory Agency. Here's an article about his win in that case and how it has affected the ability for engineers to classify themselves as such. That email came from Ryan Coleman, an engineering student at Oregon State in Corvallis, Oregon. I think it's Corvallis, not Corvallis. I need to check on that. But anyway, there's an update on that case. The man's name is Mats Järlström. It's not an easy name to say. Mats Järlström, and we've tracked him down, and he's our guest. Mats, let's start at the beginning with what exactly happened to you to start all this off. How did you come to the attention of the regulators?
Well, I started to look into how traffic signals work, and obviously how it all started for me to even do that was that my wife ran a red light at a camera-enforced intersection here in Beaverton, Oregon. So that's, well, how it all started, and I looked into the science and saw that the solution today that's used is only applicable for if you're driving straight through an intersection. And so I brought up problems to this board of engineers here in Oregon. And as maybe many know, instead of looking into the problems and the solutions that I presented to them, they rather wanted to look into if I was licensed to talk here in Oregon or not. And since I am a Swedish engineer and I moved here legally and so on, and that was more important to them than to look at the facts on the science side.
So whether you're an engineer or not, you were simply questioning whether or not the red light cameras, what were you questioning exactly?
Well, the timing of the equation actually that is used to calculate the duration of the yellow lights today was developed back in 1959 by three scientists, and they actually wrote the paper. And the reason they wrote the paper back in 1959 was that one of the scientists ran a red light. His name was Robert Herman. He was actually the scientist who wrote the first paper on the Big Bang Theory. Then there were two other gentlemen, Denos Gazis and Alexei Maradudin. Maradudin, I've gotten to know him here lately. He's still with us. He's 87 years of age today. And he agrees with me, since they only looked at the solution, as I said earlier here, that is applicable for stopping and going straight through an intersection. It doesn't account for when you need to slow down to make turns. And that is the one that I presented to the Board of Engineers and to actually the Institute of Transportation Engineers as well.
Now, Mats, when you made that presentation,
yes.
Did you include, in order to bolster your credentials, did you include that you were an engineer?
Well, that's what I am. And again, it doesn't matter if I'm an electronics engineer or
so the
whatever.
answer would be yes. You said,
yes.
I'm an engineer, guys.
Yes,
Okay.
and I understand mathematics and some science principles and scientific principles, and sure, I said that.
Let me ask you
again,
a question. In the worldwide engineering community, okay,
Yep.
you go to Helsinki or maybe Paris or Berlin, and they're holding a worldwide engineering conference across all the disciplines of engineers. And everybody stands up. It's the United Nations of Engineering. And you say, I'm Mats Järlström, and I'm a Swedish engineer. Where do people rank you in the list of 200 countries in terms of, well, he's good or he's not, just based on that?
Well, it's not for me to say, but...
Where would you guess?
Well, I think it's pretty high, because...
Would it be higher than Germany? Is a Swedish engineer respected more than a German engineer?
It's hard for me to say. I know that...
If you were ranking Scandinavian engineers, where would you put the Swedish? Above or below the Danes and the Norwegians?
I don't want to comment on that, to be honest with you, because I know it's going to be outcry whatever I say. But,
do you think your average Swedish engineer is better at applying science than your average American engineer?
I don't think so, because I think one thing we need to understand, whether we are a trained engineer or not, we still need to think And to solve the problems doesn't necessarily mean that we can run a computer program or not. We need to have the underlying ideas and actually solve them. That is kind of being creative. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an engineer in the first place. That is one thing I think I have contributed here. And it's actually something, if you read the original paper from 1959, they also call out that not enough thought has gone into this problem. And I've actually spent quite an amount of time here the past 5 years to think about the details, what's going in here for the traffic signals. And I'm working on a paper that I'd like to present here this spring, summer, to really pinpoint details that hasn't really been thought about before and how it really works.
Mats, I'm going to tell you a quick story. You would have no reason to know this, but I was the mayor pro tem of the city of Houston, and the city had come in and they had been pitched this traffic camera system that your guys. There's about 5 companies across the country or so that do this, and it was pitched to the then mayor as a way to make a lot of money. Well, the original pitch turned out to be quite different than what they did in reality. Well, there was a huge uproar here, and I had a group of individuals, some of them engineers, come to me and say, if you would actually just lengthen the yellow, just whatever it was, 2 seconds longer, you would reduce the number of people who were violating the law and who were being ticketed. And the reason that they won't do this is because they want to write tickets. It's not a public safety opportunity. It's an opportunity. It's a public finance opportunity. So when I pitched that to them, they kept saying they would do it, but they never would. And I soured on them and eventually was part of the group that we drove them out. And so all those cameras are still up, but they don't collect money anymore. So I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. And all kidding aside, I think you're absolutely, positively onto something. I think you're absolutely right. Mats, if you can hold with me for just a moment, I want to continue this conversation. For those of you who just tuned in, Mats Järlström lives in Oregon. His wife received a red light ticket, and he had the audacity to challenge the ticket on the basis that the technology is not good. And rather than listen to him, what did the Board of Engineers do? Oh, they came after him for claiming he's an engineer. But guess what? He kind of is. Wait till you hear his credentials. Coming up next. We are talking to Mats Järlström. He is, like a lot of people, a citizen of the United States of America. Are you a citizen, Mats?
Actually, I'm a Swedish citizen,
Okay.
but I'm a legal resident of the United States.
Okay. So he is a resident of the United States. His wife gets a red light ticket in Beaverton, Oregon, outside of Portland, in 2013. And he had the audacity in this country to say, citizens and residents still have rights. I would like to present to you the fact that your system doesn't work right. So you've given a faulty ticket. Rather than listen to him, they fined him for describing himself as an engineer. But guess what? He is an engineer. So your credentials, as I understand, you're an airplane camera mechanic?
Yeah, that's in Sweden, at least during my life there, it was mandatory to use or to do a military service for about 1 year. And I was assigned to work on airplanes, mainly an airplane help mechanic.
So nobody would question whether you have your engineering credentials in hand. And you weren't trying to get paid as an engineer. You were simply saying that's your educational background. And I'll tell you something, folks. If you go to michaelberryshow.com, we have linked to an article. Great work was done by a guy named Eric Boehm, who writes for Reason magazine. And he lays out some other cases where this Board of Engineers just hammered people that will shock you that they're using their power. They're misusing and abusing their power in this way. You went on 60 Minutes in 2014 to present your evidence. How did that affect this case?
Well, actually, that's not true. I only sent an email when I came up with a simple solution to extend the work that these 3 scientists from 1959 had developed. That was actually the 13th of January in 2015. And I forwarded that email actually to the Board of Engineers and to 60 Minutes. And this email that I sent out was what deemed my actions to be illegal by the board. So, and 60 Minutes never even responded to my email. But maybe down the road here I have a chance to to speak on their show, because I think this is an important part. I mean, there are two parts to this story. One is obviously that we have a freedom of speech, the First Amendment, that needs to be respected by state law, and lawmakers. You cannot have a law that overrides the First Amendment, period. The second one is obviously we need to understand the science behind traffic signals, and as you say, they should be put in place for safety and increased traffic flow. It should not be put in place for generating revenue. And my science and theories that I bring to the table using test equipment to really show the motion of a vehicle through an intersection anywhere in the world, to be honest with you, because I can simulate the data, will present that I am 100% correct with what I'm saying. And it will also help autonomous vehicle manufacturers to move forward to not having to deal with this in the future, because intersection needs to accommodate these vehicles as well, regardless if we have a driver behind the wheel or if we have an autonomous vehicle that's driven by a computer and programmed by engineers by these manufacturers. So it is the basic principle behind this is the motion of a vehicle through an intersection that can either stop or go. And today we're only allowed the time to traverse a minimum stopping distance at constant velocity or constant speed. That means if you slow down during that distance, you're not given enough time to reach the intersection. You will then run a red light. That's the problem today.
There would be no way around it.
Well, there's a dilemma, obviously, that not every driver will face. It is if you're faced with the yellow light at this minimum stopping distance, and then you're slowing down to make, for instance, a right-hand turn or left-hand turn. Because today, traffic signals are actually timed shorter for turning lanes. It's a kind of a misunderstanding and misapplication of the equation that was developed in 1959.
Well, Mats, as I see your case, I am fascinated by the traffic light situation because it's a power and money grab by governmental entities to trap people into running red lights, even those who want to follow the law, and that frustrates me. But there's a bigger issue than that, and that's a procedural issue, and that is the fact that we want residents and citizens of this country, we want them to challenge laws on the basis of expertise. We want them to challenge the science, the technology, the findings behind how we make policy. And when a governmental entity attempts in some backhanded chicken way to punish a citizen for having the audacity to speak out against something like this, that's a real problem. Where is your case now? What is the update on your case?
Well, the legal case is, I won this case to about 75%. It means I'm 100% free to continue my traffic signal research and spread the news, talking to you. I can say that I'm an engineer, and so on. However, the Practice Act law that we wanted to change also, which is very broad, who they deem to be practicing engineering. It can actually be that the middle school student or high school student or a teacher can practice engineering if you're actually looking at the wording of the law. We did change the law when it comes to the Title Act. So my wife is actually an engineer as well at Intel here in Hillsboro, Oregon. And she can say that she's an engineer now. She has a business card that says so as well, and she can now legally, publicly present that. Which is kind of crazy that we haven't been able to do so. And this board has actually enforced these laws, the Title Act law, since 1935. So I feel proud to be able to change these laws for the better for all our engineers. And not only that, what I've been told that this can have consequences across the whole country, I mean across USA, that other states can then implement the same ideas or laws.
You know, if you can hold with me for just a minute longer, Mats, and continue our conversation. Okay. Folks, we give money to campaigns, we block walk, we try to get our candidates elected in the legislative or executive branches. But this right here, this is part of why the court system is so important. Stay tuned. I want you to hear about the group that represented him, and I want you to support them because they do great work. And I want to talk about the role of the judicial process in the making of policy. Our guest is Mats Järlström. His wife, in 2013, in Beaverton, Oregon, outside of Portland, where our KEX 1190 listeners live, his wife was given a red light camera ticket. You may have red light cameras in your town. If you don't, a lot of municipalities across the country, it was a big trend. They're putting in more parking meters to capture revenues from citizens, and they put in these red light meters or lights so that they can catch people running red lights. It's supposed to be about public safety, but it's not. As Mats Järlström, our guest, tells the story, they've created a situation where you practically can't avoid running the red light if you're at a certain point as you enter the intersection because of the way they've timed the light. So he dared, as a man trained as an engineer in Sweden, he dared to go before the board and say, hey, look, I don't think your system is working well. I've got some experience here. Well, he sends an email to 60 Minutes, and in that email he says, I'm an engineer. Well, they don't want to hear this, does the state of Oregon, so they punish him for unlawfully practicing engineering. But he wasn't. He was simply saying he's an engineer, and he is. Well, he's been mostly successful in his case, and that is in large part, or in a part, because of a group that represented him. How did you get in touch with the ICJ folks, Mats?
Well, it's a little bit of a story by itself, actually. Since I mentioned that I'm an electronics engineer, I'm actually an audio engineer. I'm an expert when it comes to powered loudspeakers. And I represented the loudspeaker industry in a patent case early 2000. And I worked with a patent attorney, Perkins Coie, up in Seattle, Washington, and an attorney called Jerry Riedinger. We won the case 100%. Anyway, I contacted him after dealing with the board here and having these issues, which I felt was completely out of line. We have a First Amendment here in the United States, and we need to be able to share ideas freely. Anyway, he recommended me immediately to talk to the Institute for Justice, who is a libertarian group in Washington, D.C., or in Virginia. And I sent an email to them, and they actually responded to me within 2 days. And I had a contact with one of their senior attorneys, Robert McNamara. And then it went on from there. They have been excellent, supporting me for free, pro bono, and they take on cases that are clear to them that they will win. And so to me, I felt like there was a perfect fit for us to move forward, and so did they. So anyway, we have won the case to 75%, as I say, and the case is not 100% over because there's an appeals process that can happen here at the end of the month. So we have a few more days to wait on if the case is going to be 100% closed or if it's going to move forward.
Mats, let me ask you a question. Do you believe that whenever they said that you had basically practiced engineering without a license by calling yourself an electronics engineer and saying I'm an engineer, do you think that by saying you violated their code and their law, that they were concerned about protecting the integrity of licensing and engineering, or that they were trying to silence you from opposing red light cameras?
Well, it's obvious to me that they wanted to kill the messenger, so to say, and protect their own members. So it is, as I've said before, it's kind of a good old boys club that the Board of Engineers have in place. And if they truly wanted to protect the public, they should be, be more informed, be interested to educate their own engineers to do the best possible work. And we need to be able to listen to ideas, whether they're good or bad, and maybe comment on them at least, if they are truly experts in the fields that they're claiming to be, to promote innovation. And we can't have this kind of hanging over our heads, that we suppress people then to be willing to share ideas. As you understand, they will not bring any ideas to the table to look at in the first place that we can choose from. So it's just hampering innovation big time in this field.
You've been at this for 5 years now. You're still doing research. You're wanting to publish a paper. Obviously, it's frustrating to think that people could do what they did to you. But
Yes.
just the wheels of justice move slowly. Do you feel at the end of all this that it's been worth your effort? I mean, what might have started off really frustrating you with the process has ended up because you were willing to stay to it. You were vigilant and willing to fight the fight. Do you feel like at the end I made a difference?
Well, I feel like I already have made a difference because of the laws that will change here in Oregon, that the board cannot abuse other people for using the word engineer when they describe themselves publicly. And so that's a big win for me. And again, as I've mentioned to you, it's pretty remarkable as a Swedish citizen to be able to change the laws here in Oregon or in the United States when I can't even vote here. So that is making me proud. And I stood up for the U.S. Constitution. And again, you can say whatever you want of that, but that's how I feel. I feel proud to have done that. And then obviously on the technical side, I have shared my theories with the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which is an international organization with 15,000 members around the world. So that is also where I feel I can make even bigger changes by really educating this field of engineers, my skill set, by using test equipment and really show how these equations work and how to implement them properly. And that is not only by saying just the title engineer. Here I can save lives, because if we understand how traffic signal really work, the science behind it, then obviously that can happen. And that's even more important to me, and that's where I'm going to put my effort in now, since the federal judge here, Stacey Beckerman, has given me the rights to continue. So I'm confident I will make a difference in that field.
And I want folks to know the legislative branch writes laws. The executive branch enforces those laws. The judicial branch at the state and at the federal level reviews those laws. That's what you go to court for, to make sure those laws are fair and just, whether that be a law or, in this case, a regulatory or administrative ruling. This is why the court system matters and who's wearing those robes. And this is a gentle reminder of what my law school professor told me my first semester of law school. Those who sit on their rights lose them. Your rights are not self-enforcing. You have to be willing to fight the fight that Mr. Järlström was willing to fight. It's not going to happen without you. You have to be willing to pursue justice, and it moves slowly. Congratulations to Mats Järlström, and congratulations to the Institute for Justice. And whether you send them $5 or 10 or 10,000, they were out there with staff, lawyers, willing to fight this fight at no cost to Mr. Järlström. Send them a few bucks. They do great work.
MichaelBerry.com